Cyril Amarchand Mangaldas presents CNBCTV18, The Thought League, Season 2.
Hello and welcome to The Thought League, a show where we get the top global leaders with their ideas of change which are actionable in nature. So today we are going to talk about the trends in competition law and also remember that with the heightened M&A that is happening across the world and also the new age companies seeing a lot of traction, how is this space developing and gaining in terms of importance? Let's discuss this very interesting and very important topic at this point with two experts joining us on the show. Let me welcome on CNBC TV18 Christine Varney, the partner at Cravath, Swaine and Moore, and Cyril Shroff of Cyril Amarchand Mangaldas. Thank you so much for joining us. Now, Christine, my first question to you. How are the global trends emerging and what are the new areas of competition law that you see currently developing in the global arena?
Well, hello, and thank you for having me. It's delightful to be here with you and talk about these incredibly important issues. As our economy becomes increasingly global, most of the mergers that we're seeing today have a global dimension. So as companies are looking around and thinking about their next moves, the competition laws around the world, particularly in India and the United States, become increasingly important. As you may know, competition authorities have taken a more vigorous approach to enforcement of the anti-monopoly and antitrust laws around the world, particularly expanding their view beyond just what we call horizontal mergers and thinking quite a bit about vertical mergers. And those are mergers where in a supply chain, an upstream supplier and a downstream customer may be considering merging. Those types of mergers historically have been considered very efficient and pro-competitive, but enforcers around the world are rethinking that. They are particularly rethinking it in the area of technology. And we're seeing a lot of both M&A activity and competition enforcement in those types of spaces, in high tech and in vertical mergers.
All right, so vertical merger, that's an important area where a lot of developments are taking place. But Cyril Shroff, how is India gearing up for that? And what are the key trends that we have seen our Competition Commission really pick up on when it comes to merger control as well as also cartel enforcement during the pandemic?
Thanks, Nisha. Great question and welcome, Christine, on this show. First, let me talk about merger control and then I'll say a few words about cartel enforcement as well. So I think, the general tendency has been for Indian competition jurisprudence to kind of look west, and what happened in the US or in the EU tends to follow a few months or sometimes a few years later in India as well. But if I were to just take stock briefly of the merger control framework in India, I think it's working very well. It's very efficient and sophisticated. India has made a lot of innovations. For example, the Green Channel, where a kind of a no issues merger can be cleared in a single day. So that's where we are. But I think we are also on the threshold of a new era for regulation of vertical mergers. It's still at a nascent stage at this point, but in a global economy, this is bound to follow. And I think there's a reason for it as well. So in the pandemic, we've seen hugely disrupted supply chains. And the natural commercial reaction to a disrupted supply chain is to de-risk yourself by making vertical acquisitions along the supply chain, which would be the vertical mergers framework. So I am expecting that as this theme evolves more and as India tries to de-risk itself, that we will see greater regulation around vertical mergers. And, our mindset has otherwise been very used to the horizontal mergers, where one competitor acquires another. That may be a simplistic way of thinking about it now. So our regulator will have to be a bit more futuristic. Just a few thoughts on cartels. So cartel enforcements are in full swing. And it's also on the back of an active leniency regime. A few changes that we've seen in the last few years is that the kind of approach of being based on circumstantial evidence is now increasingly being replaced by much more evidence gathered either from dawn raids or data dumps and things like that. So there is, while it's not criminal in India as compared to the US, for example, the penalties are huge. And I think India Inc. Is waking up to the risks and the penalties associated with participating in cartels. We are seeing a new era now, and we'll talk about it a bit more later in the show as well.
That's right. In fact, Cyril Shroff, you mentioned very important points which have also showcased how the CCI has really evolved over the years. First, they had looked at cartel, but there was no teeth, and that was being talked about. And over time, that got sorted. And also, India Inc. got used to the ways of merger controls and the various ethos that are followed by the Competition Commission. So the whole industry has geared up and learned in this particular manner. But Christine made a very important point, which you also alluded to, Cyril Shroff, and it is a little futuristic still here in India as a concept. And I would like Christine to actually throw more light on vertical merger and the competition laws, prominence there as well, and especially looking at the tech companies. Because Christine, we are just about understanding the new age companies, and there has been a lot of collaboration, partnership, as well as M&A. So what is it that the antitrust commissions across the world are looking at, and how can it change the M&A game in this new space?
Well, I think that the antitrust authorities around the world are becoming increasingly concerned about the economic power that the tech giants hold in a digital economy. For example, there's a very large examination around the world of Apple and its control in the mobile phone space of apps and distribution of apps and development of apps. And I think that the concern is that, as we have seen historically, when you have very large companies that have gained economic power legitimately, incredibly, the question is, as the economy changes, are they using that power as a bottleneck to foreclose or forestall competition? So, for example, in the Apple case, which is being looked at by regulators around the world, the real question is, should there be more competition on the iPhone for app distribution, app development? Serious question. Authorities have the tools to examine that question. As you know, it's moving through the courts in the United States now. There's legislation moving around the world, and we'll take a look at it. I think the concern is that all of the big technology players, as they acquire nascent technologies that don't necessarily on their face appear to compete with the main platform, whatever it is competition in some adjacent platform being foreclosed? And does that harm consumers? Does that harm the economy generally? Tough questions. I think you can expect to see examinations both in mergers as well as what we call conduct cases, where there may not be an actual merger on the table, but just looking generally at the economic power that some of the big tech giants hold and how they're wielding it.
Right. Cyril Shroff, you made some points regarding this, and still it's a new concept. But in India, the new age companies and the tech giants are extremely active. We've just recently seen some very large transactions. What do you have to say about this particular trend?
So regulation of big tech and sort of review by the policy environment of the sheer economic power of that big technology is a very hot topic globally as well. And in a country of 1.5 billion people, it's bound to be over here as well. But there are very important distinctions in the Indian environment as well. So we have not seen so many local mergers. We've seen a lot of investment and growth activity in the technology space, principally because India is still at a very different stage from an economic cycle. We are still at a stage where there are a lot of innovative unicorns that are coming up, and the outlook, I think, which the competition authority or the policy environment will have to make adjustments. But a broader kind of look at what the implications of big tech is bound to happen because of just the sheer power that they exercise. but I see the Indian framework developing a little differently from the rest of the world.
Right, Cyril Shroff, but the vertical merger control systems go against the thesis of business that we are used to here, that is having end-to-end captive ecosystem. And that's what our tech system is also moving towards, and our digital system. So we'll have to see how this really evolves. On that note, we'll slip into a short breather on the Thought League, but come back and discuss more about the new trends picking up in the competition law right here on CNBC TV18.
League Season 2.
Welcome back. You're watching the Thought League, and we are discussing the trends developing in competition law across the world. Christine, we were discussing about the vertical merger, but another important aspect which has really come to fore under Biden administration is a look at the past acquisitions as killer acquisition. Tell us the concept and the reason behind the government's approach towards it, and what do you see going forward in M&A trends, given that this killer acquisition is right now gaining prominence and is on the radar of antitrust agencies?
Sure. Well, killer acquisition is one of those beautiful terms that can mean whatever anybody wants it to mean. So it's both forward-looking and backward-looking. And it goes a bit to what we were talking about previously in vertical mergers. The idea is, in the past, some of the big tech companies in particular have acquired smaller nascent startups that on their face didn't appear to compete with the tech company's platform. But now there's a retrospective questioning of, was that the correct way to evaluate the mergers? So, for example, when I was the Assistant Attorney General here in the United States enforcing the antitrust laws, Google acquired a company called ITA, which was a travel engine. And I think the prevailing view was, Google is not a travel company, so why shouldn't they be able to acquire ITA? That acquisition went through. And today you find Google Flights is one of the biggest, online digital travel services around, possibly foreclosing other travel services. So the concept is to really think hard about, if there is an acquisition that the acquiring company is not apparently necessarily in the same space as you would see in a vertical merger, what could be the competitive consequences down the road? It's thinking more broadly about foreclosure, principally in the vertical space. But as we talk about killer acquisitions, that term has been applied principally in the technology space. And as you said, it's both a retrospective examination and thinking more broadly going forward.
Right. We are wiser only in the when we look at it in the hindsight, actually, Christine, the way the new age companies are developing. So how does one spot it at the current moment is a very big question. Cyril Shroff, how do you see this particular space? Because a lot of companies probably are developed and created at a small scale, and they do not have the ability to scale up beyond a certain point. And funding also is a very important piece of it. And therefore, acquisitions do take place.
So this is a very tricky question, and it has huge implications on the innovation environment in India, where we are producing so many unicorns. So if we go the full length on regulating killer acquisitions, you might actually make things very difficult for a lot of innovators who have actually designed themselves to be acquired. Principally because of some of the reasons that you mentioned, that they may not be able to scale above a particular point, they may run out of funding as well. So it takes away some of their life choices, so to speak. And it's very different from a fully developed market like in the US. And therefore, I think in terms of how India should deal with it, it should approach it with a degree of caution. Now, our legislature is already thinking about something. So if there is a bill pending in Parliament to amend the Competition Act to prescribe different criteria, because the normal criteria of asset size and turnover may not be able to catch the kind of examples that Christine gave. So it might deal with things like deal value or a little bit more futuristic. Now, the problem with this approach is that it makes it very ambiguous, and you may actually land up killing the baby with the bathwater, since they're kind of on the killing metaphor at this point. So tricky issue, but it's perhaps the final output of this should be to encourage competition, but it's horses for courses, and each market is different. And we'll come to that in terms of how Asian jurisdictions, for example, Taiwan, have rejected, simply or failed to adopt what Western markets or Western regulators have prescribed for the competition regime, maybe in a different context, but same principle. So a very important topic, but with a note of caution.
That's right. Some of the developing countries may want to protect their own companies and not go the Western way, which are already a mature market. But Christine, come in on this. There's so many global trends and global, transactions taking place. How are the global antitrust agencies coordinated in their effort, thinking, as well as policies with each other?
They're very well coordinated, much more so than we've seen at any point in the last 25 years as countries around the world develop their competition regimes. When you're doing a global transaction today, you can expect to be reviewed by multiple regulators, and you can expect that those regulators will be absolutely actively coordinating with each other. Obviously, in transactions where there's a US dimension and a EC dimension, US and EC tend to try to take the lead. But, going back to our previous conversation on acquisitions, India is the home of so much important drug therapy development. And I really do worry, lots of these incredibly important drug therapies that are being developed in India, they get to market when an incumbent pharmacy firm buys them and brings them to market. And as we see coordination around the world, I hope that the Indian authority will really push the Western authorities in this era of increased antitrust enforcement to understand that so many of these promising developments don't get to market unless they are acquired, particularly in the health space, by big pharma. And that's where I think some leadership and some thought leadership out of the Indian authority can be very important in the global coordination of merger enforcement.
Right, and CCI has been in sync with many of the global trends in this particular space we have seen in the past. But Cyril, Shroff, when we are talking about the overall tech ecosystem and giving it that boost that it requires, being still at a nascent stage, data privacy, that is one of the very big concerns of the government. How do you think the Competition Commission should approach this particular aspect?
So this is again one of those questions on which there are two powerful points of view. I think that one point of view is that the competition regulator should also have some jurisdiction over the accumulation of big data and creating kind of big competitive power just by controlling the amount of data. And the counter argument is that is a topic really for the data regulator, the data protection authority to look after. It has minimal competition law implications because there is no direct evidence to show that merely because you are in possession of a big quantum of data that necessarily gives you competitive advantages. There are other ways around it as well. So this is one of those topics on which there are diametrically opposite points of view. But let's be clear about one thing, that we are fundamentally talking about two separate topics. One is competition and antitrust law and that framework, and the second is about data protection, privacy, and all of those issues. Now, in India, as you know, we are on the verge of getting a new data protection law. So I think both these pieces of law will evolve in parallel. Yes, there are some connections between the two, but let's not confuse one with the other.
All right, and very quickly, Cyril Shroff, any particular aspects where the Competition Commission can become more effective when it comes to merger controls?
We should, of course, get a view from Christine on how she sees the Indian regime from out to in, but I'll give you my two bits. So I think we have a very sophisticated competition law framework. Our regulator, who has been around now for a bit, is perceived to be a mature and sophisticated regulator. We have evolved a lot. We are constantly in dialogue with global best practices. So I think we are doing good. But there are a few areas in which improvement is possible. The big criticism I hear sometimes for our regulation, our framework, is that we should do better on due process. Secondly, that there is a lack of a clear penalty regime, and sometimes it's very high, sometimes there is no clear pattern of predictability. And I think what we therefore need is more predictability around the penalty regime. And of course, we have to keep abreast of all the big topics that are evolving now, including big technology. And let's see what happens also in the post-pandemic world.
All right, so lots to be seen. But Christine, final word to you. How is India perceived in terms of competition law overseas? Because government has made many efforts for the ease of deal making, especially when the thrust has been to attract more FDI.
Sure. When I was the head of enforcement here in the United States, we executed a memorandum of understanding with the Indian authority that allowed us to work extremely closely and very well with the Indian authority. So when I was in government, I would say the Indian authority was terrific. We couldn't have had a better partner. Now that I'm in private practice and I represent the parties doing the mergers, I think the Indian authority is one of the best in the world. We do find them very effective from the parties' point of view. There is transparency. You can always, as Cyril said, you can always do, no matter where you are in the world in your development, you can always provide more transparency, more due process. Both of those will lead to more predictability so businesses know what they're getting into when they make decisions. But overall, I give the Indian authority, best marks, both as a government enforcer and as a private party. I think they do a very good job.
With that, it's an end on a very interesting discussion, and this particular topic will remain as an important one as more trends pick up when it comes to vertical mergers as well as killer acquisitions and many more, especially related to the tech companies. So very, very valuable insights from you, Christine, Varney, as well as Cyril Shroff on the Thought League. Thanks so much for joining us with all the perspective. And with that, it's a wrap on the show. Thanks to our viewers for tuning in.
Cyril, Amarchand, Mangaldas.